A call to order the special city council meeting for Thursday, November 14th, 2024 at 2 p.m. This time I'd ask that you silence your cell phones or put them on vibrate to limit interruptions. Moving on to the agenda, item number 1, roll call.
Blessum.
Here.
Fuller. Janser. Olson. Pittner.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Samuelson.
Here. Item 2, Pledge of Allegiance.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, moving on the agenda, item number 3, action items. Item 3.1 is the Minot Police Department and Municipal Court Space Analysis Needs Study. And starting off the presentation, I think we have Dale Plessis from the Minot Police Department.
Thank you, Mayor Ross. Mayor Ross and City Council. Before I have Alan and Gloria from EAPC come up, I wanted to give you a quick rundown of what led us to where we're at today in terms of the space needs analysis. This is for the police department and for municipal court as well. So to start off with, the catalyst to this all was when City Hall moved into this building here. So the police department inherited the rest of City Hall, the old City Hall, and that resulted in us looking at space. And this is actually prior to that move, but we knew the move was coming. We began looking at the space that was available to us and looking at ways that could be used. We already knew we had some problems at the police department in terms of space. We knew that our evidence and some of our processes were at least cumbersome and difficult to operate. And that was due a lot, in large part, to the way the police department's broken up. So we knew that adding extra space from City Hall was going to be kind of cramming a square peg into a round hole. But we just didn't know what that meant in terms of what we could do as far as the possibility of upgrading the building to a different site, or what it would take to make our current building operational for us currently. We also didn't know what that would do in terms of what's right for the city of Minot. So we made a proposal, a request for proposal to give us those answers, and EAPC was selected to do that. So that's where we're at today. They provided us a proposal, and they're going to give a brief presentation on that. Before I have them come up, are there any questions for me?
Do we have any questions of Dale? Anything, Paul?
I have nothing, Mayor.
Okay.
All right, so Alan and Gloria.
Mayor and members of the council, thank you for allowing us to make this presentation. My name is Alan Dostert. I'm the president and an architect with EAPC, and I am a resident here in the city of Minot. Just have to get Gloria Larsgaard is with me, and she's our office manager in the city here in Minot, and she lives here in Minot as well. And we were hired to take a look at this. Take a look at the program, take a look at the building, take a look at how things might match and what kind of options we might have. And I'll go through that in a fairly high level for you today. We had a process in place. I'll just go through this really quick. There were 6 steps to that process. We go through what we call a lean step. Step number 1 in that lean step basically is bringing a team of people together, and not just the users, not just the police department, but you can see on the right side of the slide the people that were represented, the departments that are representing, and so forth. So the idea here is to develop a cross-section of people that would have stakeholders in the project, not just the user group itself. So going through that lean effort, there's really 2 things that we look for that come out of lean. What are the things that must be done? And this is consensus through that team, that group that you saw earlier. Again, what are those things that must be done? What are the things that define this project to be successful? And then what are the things we should do? given if budgets allow and so forth, what are the things that should also be included in that? So that's what the lean process did with that team. So item number 2, step number 2 in the process was doing a facility assessment, and our firm has mechanical, electrical, and structural trades all under one roof. So we were able to do that assessment in-house. And basically what we found is the building basically has good bones. I mean, as a structure, it's not in danger of falling down. There's no structural integrity issues, those sort of things. But the building suffers from its age, and mostly you see that in the interior finishes. They're aging and basically dated. The mechanical systems and electrical systems, I'll talk about those both at once. They're basically outdated at this point. They've lived their useful life, and there's a lot of investment in order to make them energy efficient and comfortable to the terms of an office building or a building of this magnitude would have today. So those are the finishes, the electrical and mechanical. Those are the 3 probably shortfalls within that existing building. Task number 3 was really taking a look at the space usage, how it's being used today. And this diagram basically outlines where functions are today, and it organizes them by color. And the idea, if you have a decent flow and a building that makes a lot of sense in terms of its operations and functions, is that these colors would be adjacent and they wouldn't be spread apart in terms of separation by hallways, separation by another department, and so on. So the goal is to streamline this and to get the colors, to line up and be groups of colors instead of little spots of colors. So that was the biggest thing we found out in the space usage is how, I don't want to say dysfunctional, but how broken up the departments and the activities and the process as things flow through the police department, how they work. The other thing that was quite apparent is as we did the facility analysis and the space analysis is there's a lot of limitations to combine spaces because of the different level changes in the building. There's some natural barriers, if you will, to make some of the departments more holistic because there's a ramp or there's a stair or there's other devices to allow you to go from one level to another within the building. Task number 4 was taking a look at growth projections. And these 2 slides work together. The slide on the left is from the city projections, the city comprehensive plan, and it goes out to 2040. We originally looked at this as a 20-year window, and when we got into the lean process, the city came back and said, we really want to look at this over 25 years instead of 20 years. So this chart doesn't go out quite far enough, so we had to interpolate a little bit. But this is the growth that's anticipated based on your own documents, and that growth has national standards in terms of how many staff per 1,000 are recommended. And that number is somewhere between 2.1 to 2.5. And right now, that graph shows that on the right side shows the positions it says allowed. And by allowed, that means what was budgeted by this very body, what was included and what was the department able to bring on based on the budgets and what was approved. They've never been able to reach that recently. They've been under those numbers. So we took a look at where they are, and we projected that number out, and then we took an average. So we had to start with some kind of a baseline in terms of where the growth for this project might be. And the point is, this is kind of an average of averages, so it's not very aggressive on either side. It's not super aggressive on growth, and it's certainly not super aggressive for lack of growth. It's just a midland approach that seems fairly reasonable at this point. Task number 5 was to take a look at not only that space analysis, the actual square feet, excuse me, that is being utilized and what it should be based on the growth. And in this particular slide, the real takeaway is the things that are in the red box. And I'm going to go through some of those real quick. Well, a couple of numbers real quick. The existing police department has 31,480 square feet. That's what they occupied before City Hall vacated the building. There was an additional 9,670 square feet that was vacated. If you take a look at the programmatic space that they actually occupied, it was about 27,000, and the rest of that space was taken up by circulation, mechanical rooms, and support spaces. But there's a total there today of 41,150 square feet available to be used in that building. We looked at the 20-year needs, and then we added this graph kind of evolved as we were asked to break it out to 25 years. And at 25 years, the total growth of staff was anticipated to be 16, and the square foot necessary with the programmatic elements that would be part of a functioning police department would be 75,209. That includes the courts, the city court system. It also includes special operations. It also includes a city garage, a patrol garage, if you will. None of those three are, of course, in the building now. The courts are up in the auditorium. There's no fleet garage to speak of, and the special ops really has some presence there, but basically not the presence that they need. So that brings us to a need of 75,000 square feet. If we take the courts out of it, we're down to 71,000-ish. The national standard would tell us that we should be at 73. So we're right there. I mean, we're just a little bit under what the national standards would ask for. And those standards are they're not aggressively high. They're very conservative, but being close to that is where we wanted to be. So that tells us that we need an additional 34,000 square feet that does not exist in that facility today. And that's really the point of this slide, is after we went through the programming, we're 34,000 square feet short in that existing building. So then we started taking a look at the last part of it is solutioning. And we're not saying these are the only way to do it, but this was, after a lot of study and going back with a number of different options, this is what we came up with that would fit the site and fix the flow and operational activities within the building. And you can see on this slide, there's a series of additions that are recommended. And there's additions to the east, additions to the north, and then there's separate standalone buildings in the parking lot to the south. And I'll explain those as we go forward here. This is just a block-loaded diagram of what we came up with to solve this issue within the footprint of the site. Not talking about the courts at this point, just talking about the PD and its garage. And you can see the colors are now starting to match up, be adjacent to each other, and it's not spread all over. And the flow in terms of evidence and workflow in terms of the patrol officers coming in and doing their reports and so forth is a very straight line and very much concise and organized compared to the way it happens today. It kind of is all over the place today. And I'm not going to go through each of these spaces, but this is, you can see if I go back, you can see the yellow is the garage, and the yellow in the front is basically what amounts to public space and the chief's offices and reception and those sort of things. So that's where the additions occur onto the building at this point. But and then the upper floor, basically we're taking advantage of the entire upper floor as well, and those functions are noted here. What's not in that footprint proper is the courts or special ops. They just don't fit on the site. We looked at a number of different ways of making it work. We looked at multi-story options. The building isn't set up structurally to be able to do that reasonably. We would end up demoing out huge portions of the building, and those costs were not in line with what it meant to do something on grade adjacent to it. Does special ops have to be contiguous with the building? No, it doesn't. Having some adjacency is certainly helpful. Could it be on the other side of the city? I've done, in Fargo, we did the public safety building, and the bomb squad and SWAT team is not anywhere as close to the police department. But in a town of this size, and with the people who respond to the special ops, it just makes sense to have some adjacencies. They could then come in, for instance, if they happen to be on patrol, they could bring their car into the patrol garage, and they could immediately be close to responding to an incident. But it doesn't fit. So this is that little section of the parking lot just south and west of the auditorium, just up the hill, if you will, from the existing police department, and it shows the courts, which is not a lot of square feet required. That's the rusty-colored brown corner, and then the aqua and the blue are part of the special ops and the necessary parking for those. So here's the pros and cons of the plan. This new plan resolves your space needs for the next 25 years based on the growth projections that we used. It continues to use an existing building, which is always the greenest approach, if you will, instead of knocking something down or starting over. If you're concerned about the sustainability, that's the most reasonable way to make things work, is work with what you have. It improves that efficiency throughout the entire department and renovates most of it, so it works very well. The security, confidentiality, and all those sort of things that were that came out of our lean study are all being addressed and met in this plan. The construction of a new squad garage is a big question. I'm not 100% sure what your squad cars cost off the lot, but if they're a $60,000 vehicle, you're probably putting that much into that vehicle in technology. So you got a $100,000 to $120,000 vehicle sitting outside all winter. I don't think any of us who bought a new car who have a garage would leave it on the street. So it just makes sense to take care of those vehicles and get them inside a garage for a number of reasons, not just for the electronics and the technology that they contain, but for the ability to keep them out of mischief, keeping them off the parking lot. If they are outside, they're likely locked up and running, so they're probably running many, many hours if someone's in doing their report and that sort of thing during the winter. So it just makes sense to do a squad garage, and that's kind of the standard of the industry these days. Everyone's looking at getting those vehicles protected. And then the last part of it is this facility is fairly central to the city, so the location makes sense from that standpoint. The cons of putting this kind of plan together is it utilizes virtually everything that's available on site. I mean, there is some parking, but that parking it's right on the edge of being enough parking. So we have pushed the garage size and pushed the square footages to the point where parking is an absolute premium. I mean, we're right there where we don't have any other soft space on the site. So we're using 100% of the site up. As I mentioned earlier, there's still a number of level changes within the building. If we were going to plan a new building, we would never have that amount of level change in the circulation in between departments and those sort of things. And to address those would be a really expensive price tag. And in some cases, tough to do because of ceiling heights and structural clearances in those areas. Special operations are not contiguous to the building, but they are close. We look at that as potentially a con in terms of being able to really be connected. Not necessarily an absolute, but it's a good thing if it was. The municipal court is really not adequately resolved from a standpoint of we're moving them out of the auditorium into this location, and parking and circulation and having them as kind of an island is probably not the best thing. There's some adjacencies to the activities at the courthouse that make a lot of sense. We don't address that with this location. It's basically the same as, the same location from that standpoint in terms of moving incarcerated people back and forth. It doesn't improve that at all. Special operation, that investment is a long-term investment now that if you outgrow this building, and you do 25 years from now, it is at the end of its life. Now you have special ops as an island onto itself and a new location somewhere else. So that's a little bit of a mismatch of how you'd really want to do it. And certainly these renovations will cause a lot of disruptions because all this has to happen while this is still home for the police, because we didn't look at an alternative location while this work was being done. We assumed it'd be phased while they occupied the space. And it continues, a big investment near the tracks. And I'm not 100% sure what the flood plan has in store for this area, but it's right on the edge, of course. Right now, if you look at the 500-year floodplain, what used to be the old apparatus bay, the far west end of the building, is completely within the 500-year floodplain. So it doesn't address those issues in terms of a long-term investment and putting money into it. So the last piece we really put together was a cost analysis. And so we looked at construction costs. And of course, construction costs can be as volatile as anything in the world right now, depending on how much competition you get. We're assuming a project of this magnitude would bring in some larger companies to take a look at it. It would certainly could be taken on by the local contractors as well. But it's somewhere in that $40 to $50 million range, 45 to 50 million. Okay, that's to renovate what we have right now and to do those additions. Okay, if we started from scratch and said, okay, we're going to do a greenfield site and do a new building, those costs are more in the $60 to $70 million range. Okay, so there's obviously a premium to build greenfield. But if we take a look at that and we look at that cost analysis over 50 years, that initial savings up front, just to make sure people know what they're looking at and eyes wide open in terms of the future, is you put that money into that facility now, and 50 years from now, that facility will be at the end of its life for two reasons. One, the structure at that point and the systems will no longer really be usable. But the real problem is there's no growth. And so you've outgrown the facility. So now you have to rebuild the facility. And at that time, what is that cost going to be? And I'm not going to really go through these two slides with a lot of great detail. But basically, that investment in 25 years, renovations and additions, you'd have $217 million into a building 50 years from now, right? If you start with new construction, you have $100 million into it because you aren't replacing it down the road. You're building a building for the next 50 years. So it's just something to keep in mind, and I know that's a long ways out for a council today to be considering. But in terms of being a steward of the dollars over a period of time and making an investment that stands the test of time, it's just important to keep those things in mind in terms of what we would invest now and have to replace, as opposed to what we wouldn't have to replace down the road. So that's the end of my presentation, and I certainly would open up any questions you might have.
Any questions?
Okay.
Mike?
Alan, thank you for that. As I've read through this, first thing that I wanted to clarify, if I remember from my reading, when we do a square footage calculation for this, did I read that right? Was it something like 30 by 10 or about 300 square feet per sworn officer? I can't remember exactly what it was. I have that in my head.
That's correct.
And so that's what I wanted to make sure that I was clarifying.
And I want to clarify that further, Councilman Blessum. That is just the administrative and workspace. That doesn't include like the garage space. That wouldn't include the space for the courts. It wouldn't include the space for special ops. That would just be for the operations without those ancillary, and other departments would not be included in that either. When I say other departments, other things like animal control and those sort of things. That's just PD proper.
Sure. And regardless, that's really just a rule of thumb, right? I mean,
It's a national
when we're
standard.
looking nationwide,
Yep.
here's what a typical station would look like in terms of the space per sworn officer. Is that the right way to think of it?
That's correct.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to get that clarified up front. Okay, the other question that comes to me, we've got the big picture numbers now around renovate and new, and we know the inflationary things. We got plenty of that with flood, and I'm sure there'd be some of that here as well. Can you give me, if you've got it, or just a ballpark for what the court and the special ops buildings, what portion of that is this, and what, if we took the building itself and did everything that you've talked about, but did not do those two pieces, do we know that breakdown?
I don't have the cost breakdown. It's about 4,000 square feet for the courts if you do standalone. And the issue with the courts is right now the courts occupy 1,432 square feet. Okay, if they were to be part of a bigger department or a bigger building, they would need about 3,000 square feet if they were part of a building like this. If they stand alone, because then they would need their own standalone mechanical systems and those sort of things, entries and those things, it'd be about 3,900 square feet. So they need roughly 4,000 square feet. And if I do my math really quick in terms of what I think we were using for their number, bear with me a second. Hard to do math in front of you guys. I should be able to do this in my head, but that's somewhere between $1.5 million and $2 million.
Okay. All right, and then how about the special ops building?
The special ops is going to be similar in cost. It's going to be more square feet, but it's going to be more of an open bay, so it's going to be roughly the same cost.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm good for right now.
Rob?
Thank you. Thank you guys for the work you've done on this. One of the questions I had when I read through it and was looking at it, this is all predicated on how much Minot is going to grow over the next 25 years, right? The space we need, the officers we need, and everything like that.
That's correct.
Okay. So I guess my concern or some of the questions I have, we're anticipating that Minot's population, from what I'm reading here, on the moderate level is going to be about 65 to 66,000 people in 25 years. 40 years ago, in 1984, there was 36,000 people in Minot, and today we're just over 47,000. So in 40 years, we grew 11,000 people. Why are we assuming we're going to grow at double that or more over the next 25 years?
All we had was the data that was given to us by the city, and that data was from the Minot 2040 Draft Comprehensive Plan, and we followed those guidelines.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Any other questions? Any questions, Paul?
No, Mayor.
Okay. Harold, anything?
Not necessarily a question. I think you answered one of my questions, and that was the difference on the slide of the square footage needed, where on the left side it said municipal court needed 3,000, but on the right with the total calculations, it was 3,900 square feet. But I think we were talking space in an existing building versus a standalone, correct?
That's correct.
And just for council's information, so several months ago, we had explored the option of potentially moving municipal court into the administration building at the county. EAPC Gloria had provided some rough calculation numbers, an estimate of $200 to $225 per square foot. I won't go over the numbers for the county courthouse. There was, or not county courthouse, the county administration building, because there were some other factors in with that, with regards to you'd have lease costs, as well as they were wanting basically a security officer present at all times too, that they wanted the city to help pay for. So there's additional costs in considering that spot. But as I've discussed with staff, in the garage next door, we do have some unfinished commercial space. We have about 2,600 square feet available in there, so it's about 400 square feet short of the 3,000 that's recommended. But it's well above the 1,432 square feet that they're currently in. So taking the numbers from that was provided from Gloria earlier, at that $200 to $225 per square foot, it would be in the ballpark of $520,000 to $585,000 to renovate that 2,600 square foot. And then given the inflation numbers and stuff, I went ahead and calculated an additional 25%. So that would put you at 728,000 square feet. And then there's an additional $50,000 in cost that was recommended for security features for the facility outside of those numbers. So you're looking at probably, hopefully, what I would consider a high estimate of 800,000. Of course, in today's world, that could still be low as well. But I just wanted to provide that as an option and an alternative to what's been discussed here, as opposed to the standalone building. And EAPC hasn't done any work as far as looking at finishing out the space over here. But those were just some, that's an alternative I wanted to present to the council for consideration and for the public as well, that maybe there's a more cost-effective way that won't meet the full 3,000 square feet, but comes pretty close, that is maybe a more realistic, more reasonable alternative today. So,
If I may comment real quickly on that, I think your numbers work well, with one exception. The amount to remodel the existing building, the existing administrative building, is slightly lower than it would be to remodel this, because there's already mechanical and electrical systems in place, and we would have to add a little bit to that just to flesh that out, because we're basically finishing out an untempered space.
Sure, and I would agree, and those are all factors that we'd have to look at. So again, don't quote these numbers specifically, but we do have some mechanical stuff in there, as we just put the transit center in there. This facility will have close proximity to City Hall. It puts it a little closer to the county courthouse and puts it with more visibility, say from Broadway and just downtown specifically. So it'd have more visibility, better access than their current location as well. But I would agree with your point that the numbers are probably low because there may be some additional costs with the space than what we've looked at other spots, so.
Mike.
Mr. Mayor, so, and not maybe specifically to this, but in terms of what we're trying to accomplish here today, you know, we're getting the presentation back. As far as I can tell, this is the presentation that's been given before, because I've seen it. I mean, it's the same idea. So are we, Harold, are you looking for direction out of today on what we would like to see in terms of what would move us towards a decision? I realize that part of the second item here is a part of this question now, because we've got to deal with, you know, that's part of the site problem that we've got now. So I guess, do we want to start some of that discussion now, or do we want to see both before we start that discussion?
I'll leave that up to you, but in general, the direction staff is looking for is a more focused, limited direction to staff of what direction do you want us to pursue? Are we looking at potentially renovating the existing building, or are we looking at some alternatives from that of a reduced scope with regards to that? Or are we looking at a new facility and taking that longer term approach, that longer term investment approach? Staff needs some direction on which way the council and the community want to go with that. And then once we get done that conversation, regardless of which one that is, staff needs to have some conversation with council of how are we going to pay for that, which leads to the conversation that we had on Tuesday with the Parks Board with regards to a potential public safety sales tax, those kinds of things. You know, is the council interested in exploring that, or is that not of any interest and we need to look for other alternatives on how we pay for that? Those are some of the things that we need to begin looking at as staff. So trying to bring those two things together. What is the council's potential solution to solving this need for our police department and municipal court? Are we renovating what we currently have, or are we building new, or some hybrid in between? And then how are we going to pay for all that?
Okay, so, Mr. Mayor, I guess, and that's perfect, Harold, because, you know, I'm prepared to talk about what I would like to see, especially if this was done in a vacuum. Now, it gets a little complicated when we talk about the MI4 impacts here that we've got coming. So, you know, I do certainly want to hear that. You know, I guess just for the benefit of my compatriots up here, you know, where my mind is going with this, I have a hard time with the idea that we would say, hey, you know what would be, go ahead, Tom. Yep.
Just, but Alan, if you want to sit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I may
We'll
talk
call
for
you
a
up if
while,
we have
Alan, is what
questions,
he's
but
getting at, so that's.
Mr. Mayor and council members, thank you for the opportunity to present, and Gloria's prepared to talk about the library portion of
Okay,
it.
we'll finish our discussion, then Gloria will ask you to come up if there are no further questions of Alan and Dale.
Would
So
you rather
continue.
hear that, or should I keep going with
Let's
this?
continue. I mean,
Okay.
since you strike while the iron's hot, so to
Right.
speak, so.
So I'll tell you where my mind goes with this. You know, as I was saying, the idea that we would, you know, again, we would hire a consultant, which is good. We need that outside thought. We need that overall perspective. And we would come up with, hey, man, what would be the right way to do it, right? What's the best way that we could go about this? That's certainly a perspective, and we want to know that. And I think we've got that. I think we've got an idea of, hey, if we did this right, let's say in a renovation perspective, this is what that would look like. From the real world, you know, I'm new on council, so I don't look at it through the government lens yet fully. When I look at it from the business lens or from my home lens, I say, well, shoot, what's my budget? You know, the story that I've told is when we moved into the current house that we're in, we started taking a look around at houses, and my wife's like, oh man, I really like that one. I'm like, well, yeah, it was $500,000. Of course you liked it. You know, yeah, it's going to be beautiful. And we would have a beautiful facility if we spent $70 million on a brand new building. I mean, we would. There's no question about that. And I think all of us, without the other constraints we have in what we're doing, would love to do that. But that's not the reality of where we are today. So where my mind goes is to say, as a potential direction to staff, is what can we get done for, say, 12 million? What can we get done for 25? And then really to my question for Alan, what would just the renovation of the current facility look like, which it sounds like is gonna be somewhere in that 40-ish million, 40 to 45. So that to me is what I would like to see. And I guess for the purposes of discussion, maybe I'll make that as a motion, is that we see an option come back at 12, 25, and then this one that just removes the other two facilities. You know, we don't have to end up there. That's not my point, but I'll throw it out there just because it's probably better to do it under a motion.
12, 25, and the full
12,
remodel?
25, and the full renovation plan for the current structure, but without the two south buildings, so leaving those off. So no special ops building and no court. And again, what I'm asking for there is for us to get that information back, so we could see what we think could get done for those numbers.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second. Further discussion?
So I guess I'll just continue for a second. I mean, again, that where my mentality comes from is we've got a lot of constraints going on in our budget right now. We've got pressures everywhere. And again, while we would all love, and I appreciate Alan's perspective on this, that's saying, look, if you look at it as a 100-year process, let's say, yeah, of course that big build up front makes sense. But I think the taxpayers right now have been loud and clear to us that they're strapped. And we got to be real careful about what burdens we're putting on them right now. And as we get into the discussion on whether a half cent makes sense from our direction, we'll talk about that. But I think we've got to be careful with that. And so, you know, again, I threw this out as one option for us to look at. If there's other amendments or discussion, I'm open to that. But I just thought it'd be a good place to start.
Rob?
Thank you. You know, I agree with Mike. I would like to see not the grand plan, but what can we live with plan to maybe help alleviate some of the cost here. Because as Mike said, you know, the community as a whole has said, we're done. We don't have any more left. We can't pay any more property tax. We can't pay any more sales tax. You know, we're tied to NAS for at least another 3 to 4 years. We're tied to flood control for 35 to 40 years. Do we want to tie up more money in another project for another 25 to 50 years? I mean, I don't think that's fiscally responsible of us to do such a thing. So I'm in agreement with you, Mike. I'd like to see a what can we live with plan or what can we work with type thing at a cheaper cost.
Anything, Paul?
No, Mr. Mayor, not at this time.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, if I could add one thing. The one caveat to this, we don't have Alderwoman Olson here today. And she's been heavily involved in this. And in a note that she sent to us, she has an alternative. And unfortunately, we don't have that in front of us right this second. And so it's very hard to know what that might be. It might ring true with me and be ready to roll. So we have to keep that in mind. We're going to need to hear that as well because she's been integrally involved throughout here.
Yeah. And once again, I think this is, you know, we're just providing direction. You know, we're not committing any dollars to it, or so I think that's a good route to go. But Dave Lakefield, if you could step up when we're talking sales tax, talking responsibilities, and talking our commitments. Do you have? I'm just looking for when we're looking at NAS and a potential to have those sales tax dollars available if needed, or if. How long are we committed on sales tax, or what's the forecast there to complete with NAS?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, right now it looks like we will have at least another 2 years of allocation going to NAS. There are a couple of phases of that, some booster pump stations and those things that have not been bid out yet. So there's still some unknown factors there, so that could change a little bit as we move forward with that too.
Thank you. Thanks.
Not a question for you, Dave, but maybe for Jason or for Mr. Ackerman. My other question is it was alluded to about flood control impacts. And so I wanted to ask the question that, I mean, when we're talking about flood control impacts to the library, is there any potential impacts to the design of flood control? Like how much of flood control is protecting this building? So is there anything the council should be considering that if they did move and build a new building versus renovating the current one, would that affect the design and the costs of MI4 coming through here, or does that not play a factor and it doesn't matter?
Mayor Ross and Mr. Stewart, I would say stay tuned. We've got some slides that are going to show some different options for that particular building, and we'll talk a little bit too about kind of relative flood risk. Alan alluded to it a little bit in terms of different elevations of the building being more susceptible to flooding, and we'll get into that here shortly.
Is there any further discussion? Seeing none, please, are we recording or are we doing the roll call?
I don't know if everyone's logged in, so I
Okay, let's do
will.
the roll call. Call the roll.
Blessum,
Yes.
Fuller, Pittner,
Yes.
Ross,
Yes.
Samuelson.
Yes.
Motion passed.
Are we moving on then to item 3.2? Is that what I'm assuming? I mean, it looks like we're complete, right? With providing direction, is that the direction you were?
Was Gloria going to speak under 3.2, or is she still speaking under 3.1? Because I think she has a space needs analysis for the library. Is that what you're speaking to? So maybe we have Gloria finish up on 3.1. 3.2 is more the flood control MI4 coming through and its impacts to both the library and the police department. So maybe we
Okay,
let
Gloria.
while we're on the topic of space needs, let's let Gloria kind of get you up to date where they're at with that so far.
Go back to the other presentation here. So at the library at this moment, we have done, the scope of work that we have for the library is do a lean study, which we're going to start mid-December here. We assembled a good group of people from the community
Gloria,
and user groups.
could you just pull the mic down a little bit? Thank you.
So we are starting the lean process in December here. We are going to have a meeting with the user groups and some people from the community, and I'm sure some from council were already identified, and so that is going to start. When it comes to facility assessment, the library director brought that to my attention, that there might be some change of plans with flood work, so we decided to do that last instead of doing that first, depending how that evolves. And then for space usage need analysis, right now we have just done the walk through the building a couple times. That's all we're doing. But once we meet with lean, then we identify those needs, and then that need analysis comes after that. And of course, the planning and design solutioning hasn't started yet. So we're at the very beginning, but we're starting and excited to go wherever this process will take us. That's all I
Any
have.
questions?
Any questions?
Seeing, Paul, any questions?
No, Mayor.
Okay, thank you,
All right,
Gloria.
thank you.
Okay, now moving on to item 3.2, MI4 Southside discussion, potential impacts to the Minot Public Library. Who is going to lead the discussion? I saw the head nod on the. Go ahead, Mr. Ackerman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's see here. We get our slides up on the screen. Okay. Ryan Ackerman, work as the administrator for the South River Joint Board. Objectives for today. So from the South River Joint Board perspective, we want to talk a little bit holistically about the area around the library and the current police station. Talk about the history of what has happened specifically since 2011, because there have been some significant changes with regard to the proposed plans for that area, and I just want to talk through that history to give the council an understanding of that history. Also want to review flood risk for the area around the public library, the police station, the 6th Street Stormwater Pump Station, basically this general neighborhood that we've been talking about here. And then also give some relative indications of flood risk for the privately owned structures that are also in this area. There are several businesses that would be affected by this decision. Talk about options for reducing flood risk. There are some high-level costs associated with those, but then ultimately what I'm hoping that we get out of this is to receive some feedback from the council with regard to, quite frankly, risk tolerance, right? Because a lot of what I'm going to be talking about here is not, we believe we should build to this level. It's not that at all. It's talking about relative risk based on elevations of different buildings and the investment required to get to certain levels. So really just looking for interactive dialogue today. So feel free to interrupt me at any time and ask questions. So why are we, the joint board, seeking this input? The joint board, and I've mentioned this before to you guys, has commissioned an update of the master plan or the preliminary engineering report for the project. And that's been done for two basic reasons. Number one, to identify means to reduce capital and social cost. Previously, we've talked to you about the Livingston Cooley bypass plan. We think that's going to shave roughly $40 million off the capital cost. One thing that we haven't talked to the council about that we're excited to do so in the coming weeks is we're working in other areas of town to reduce the social footprint of the project, to reduce the number of affected homes. And we've got an idea in the neighborhood of the 27th Street diversion that would basically reduce acquisitions by about 50. Also, we're doing this in an attempt to update the costs to complete the project so that we can take another look at financial planning for state and local funding and then develop our strategy for securing additional federal funding. Our intent is to complete this master planning effort by the end of this year, to be armed with this additional information going into the Legislative Assembly in January. Okay, so talk a little bit about the history, meeting objective number one. 2011 flood is showing up here on the screen. You know, just some context. We've got these areas called out for the public library, for the police station, former city hall. Here's another image from there. So obviously the area is flood prone, and the Corps of Engineers in the City of Minot constructed an emergency levee in 2011 that prevented significant damage from occurring to the public library and also City Hall. But there was still damage, okay? So it's not like, this isn't a fully designed and implemented flood protection strategy. This is flood fighting, right? So you do the best you can to reduce risk, reduce damage, but it's not necessarily foolproof. Following the 2011 flood, the state of North Dakota commissioned the preliminary engineering report. The original concept for this area is shown up on the screen. I want to point out that that concept included structural protection. What I mean by that is levees and flood walls on the south side of the Maple Diversion Channel. And those levees and flood walls would have protected the library, the police station, former City Hall, those businesses that I spoke of earlier. But there have been a number of things that have happened since 2012 that have led to a shift in the strategy in this particular area, and I want to talk about that a little bit. So some significant things since 2012. The City of Minot pursued and secured a grant to construct an independent system around the Minot water treatment plant. Okay, so there was, I believe it was about $22 million that came in through FEMA, through the Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, to construct the flood walls around the water plant. Originally, under the PER, the master plan, that was to be protected with a system that would have spanned basically from the water treatment plant all the way to near the old Cloverdale plant. That would have been one system with levees and flood walls on the south side of the river. So this was kind of the first action that took that piece off the table and identified an alternative funding source for it. Following that, the City of Minot also pursued and secured a grant to acquire properties in the vicinity of the Moose Lodge in lieu of building a levee around that area. Okay, so that was done through the National Disaster Resilience Competition. So really that eliminated the purpose for building a levee from the water treatment plant in north. Okay, so now the levee on the south side of the river doesn't make a lot of sense now from the water plant through the Moose Lodge area. Following that, in dealing with the Moose Lodge itself, the decision was made to pursue a partial acquisition of Moose Lodge in lieu of a complete acquisition that was originally contemplated and would have been required in order to build levees through that area. Okay, so that decision was made. Also, as you're aware, the City of Minot pursued, through the National Disaster Resilience Competition, funding to relocate City Hall and Central Dispatch from its former locations. So that particular need, if you will, from a flood protection standpoint to protect that critical infrastructure, that went away. Following that, the Corps of Engineers was involved through the federal feasibility study. And basically through that process, it was identified that there will not be a federal interest in building any levees on the south side of the Maple Diversion Channel because the benefits there do not outweigh the costs, that incremental cost of building levees versus the benefits that we would derive from it. And a lot of that is primarily driven to the fact that it's a series of structures that sit relatively high elevation-wise. Another related action, BNSF Railway, in our discussions with them, they strongly opposed any flood protection which would have crossed their railroad tracks. So then as a result of that, designs were modified for phases MI5 and MI6 to eliminate those track crossings. So all of this stuff affects where we are, or has affected where we are today, which this is the concept that the City Council recently endorsed for the Maple Diversion. And you'll see that there's no levee or flood wall contemplated on the south side of that channel, okay? From the joint board perspective, the conversation has been that even if there was a levee or flood wall contemplated, planned, or proposed, that would very likely fall lower in the priority ranking in terms of implementation because we aren't necessarily benefiting homeowners or residents directly. It's government buildings and it's businesses, which, don't get me wrong, we all understand the importance of all this stuff, but the joint board is really taking the aspect and the perspective of residents and homes as kind of the primary purpose for flood control. So that's kind of a review of the history. Now I want to talk just a little bit about flood risk in this particular area. So the graphic that I've got on the screen here is, again, from that preliminary engineering report completed in 2012. The green shading that's shown on here would be indicative of the areas that would have flooded without emergency measures. So the library certainly would have sustained damage. Portions of the former City Hall building would have sustained damage. The 6th Street pump station, which wasn't there at the time. And then there would also have been some impacts to private non-residential structures along Western Avenue. That's without emergency measures. What we saw, of course, in 2011 was some fairly significant emergency measures being implemented. And the graphic that's on the screen now shows the actual rough inundation extents from 2011, taking those measures into account. So largely, damages were minimized at the library and the former City Hall building. And you also see a couple of the private structures had developed their own, privately owned structures had developed their own levees to reduce their individual flood risk. And it shows up even better on this image from Google Earth. You can see those ring levees that were built around the current Burkhardt Orthodontics building, formerly the Artistry building. And then there's also a storage or shop building that's located east of there. In addition to that, another thing that we have to consider here is future FEMA floodplain considerations. So the preliminary information that's been submitted to FEMA as a part of the appeal process, which we think is going to ultimately be fairly close to what is adopted, shows a 100-year floodplain elevation of around 1557. What that does is that would affect, and I'm going to show this on the slides that follow, it would affect the lower levels of the library and also any basement levels within the former City Hall building. So just taking a look at the library, I want to kind of stack some of these elevations up here just to give a relative context for flood risk versus where, the, let's say, damage thresholds would lie for these various buildings. So what I've got shown on here are rough elevations for the Minot Public Library. The basement elevation, the lowest floor there is at 1551. In about 2013, there was a flood wall that was built around that southwest corner of the library to prevent water from going into the door that was there. That was primarily done to prevent flooding from the 6th Street underpass and not the river. That was the purpose of that one. That's built to an elevation of about 1555. Unfortunately, the 100-year elevation that I mentioned is at 1557. So that lowest level of the library would definitely be susceptible to flooding in its current form during the 100-year flood event. Okay. Other things to point out here, though, are when you get onto the main floor of the library, the main floor sits at about an elevation of 1564. That's actually about a foot higher than what was experienced in 2011, a foot higher. So in 2011, the water would not have gotten onto the main floor, but it would have been at about the level where the overhead doors enter the library, to where the bookmobile used to park on the east side. That elevation there is a little bit lower. So it's at about that same level. One thing I want to point out here too is that I've got the design flood level on here. And the reason why that's higher is because hydraulically, when we build this system through Minot and we restrict the river to its riverbanks, we would expect to see higher water surface elevations for a similar flow rate. Okay, so if a 2011 type flood were to occur in the future, and we have a project in place that prevents damage, we would expect that water to be about 2 feet deeper at City Hall for that flood of record event. Okay, at the former City Hall, excuse me. So that's a little context for the library. Looking now at the police station and how those elevations sit. Again, I've got the 100-year flood elevation, the 2011 flood elevation, and the design flood elevations, kind of in those lines shown in blue. Basically, the only main floor that would have gotten wet in 2011 would have been that portion of I'm gonna call it the former fire station, the far west side of the police station building. But one of the things that is not shown on here, and I want to point that out, is that basement elevations here aren't shown, right? So while the water may not, come through the front door, certainly sewers and things like that and seepage through the ground, there's some susceptibility for damage there that could potentially be mitigated in a relatively cost-effective way. But just kind of want to point that out. I mean, this isn't like saying that, if you do nothing, the main portion of the former City Hall portion would be fine. I mean, there's a basement in there, and there would certainly be damages that would be sustained during a large flood. But generally speaking, the main floor of the east side of the police station, it sits several feet above the 2011 flood. The former City Hall portion of that building sits about 2 feet higher. The main floor sits about 2 feet higher than what was experienced in 11. And then again, that the western portion, the former fire station portion, would be more susceptible to flooding, obviously because of the lower elevation there. So, okay, a couple other structure elevations in the neighborhood here to be concerned about, or just to be knowledgeable of, would be a more appropriate way to put it. The way that I've got this color coded here is that the structures that are shown kind of in the red text would be structures located at or below that 100-year or projected 100-year flood elevation, just kind of saying these ones are most susceptible to flooding in this group. The ones that are in the yellow would be structures below what happened in 2011, but above the 100 years, so relatively resilient to flooding, but certainly susceptible for a large event like 2011. And then in green, those would be structures at or above the design flood elevation. So basically the ones on the north side of Western Avenue and closest to 6th Street, those two, one of them being the 6th Street pump station, would be the ones most susceptible to flooding, and that intuitively makes sense. Okay, so what are the options? I'm going to kind of go from, I call it wild to mild here in terms of how I would describe these options. The full protection option is shown here on the screen. This was conceptually developed in 2019 and quite frankly left in draft form. There wasn't much done with it. It was done kind of concurrently with some high-level work with the Corps of Engineers to identify means to reduce flood risk on the south side of the diversion channel. But What this would have included would have been a flood wall between the railroad tracks and the buildings along the north side of Western Avenue and the public library. I would call it in relative terms, a high-cost option, probably in the neighborhood of $50 million. Now, we haven't done any detailed cost estimating of this, so this is a bit of a swag at the number here, but it's going to be in that relative cost range. In addition to that, one thing that we would be really concerned about with this particular option is that while it shows protection for all of the buildings down here, including those on Western Avenue, we think there would be significant implementability concerns because we would actually require right-of-way from BNSF, and that's going to be a tough sell. Also, just from an overall benefits standpoint, I would consider it relatively moderate benefit to the private properties because, as I mentioned with those elevations, they currently have relatively low flood risk elevation-wise, and they've also, some of them, demonstrated their ability to flood fight against a 2011 type flood. So I think that's just important to kind of weigh that as we consider options here moving forward. So another option here, I'm going to call this, let's call it a half protection option. This was recently conceptually evaluated. This would be a flood wall between the railroad tracks and the library and the 6th Street pump station. Cost of this would be roughly $42 million. It does provide protection to the library, to the police station, the 6th Street pump station, but in this particular concept, there would be no benefit to those private properties located west of the 6th Street pump station on Central Avenue. Well, there's also a relocation option, right? So the relocation option, also again evaluated here relatively recently, would include relocating the library and the police station. It would include floodproofing modifications to the 6th Street pump station. This is the highest cost option. Basically what the estimate of $64 million represents would be new in-kind replacement of the square footage that's there. Okay, so this doesn't consider any future PD building programming, the stuff that Mr. Dostert talked about. This would be basically replacing, on a square foot to square foot basis, what is there currently. Then there's also some hybrid options here. One of the things that we've been kicking around here is a concept to relocate just the library, potentially flood-proofing around the police station to the elevation of the flood of record. Also some flood-proofing modifications to the 6th Street pump station. The reason why flood-proofing modifications to 6th Street pump station would be important is because that will become a critical feature, operational feature of the Maple diversion. So we do need to have that operational. Primarily what it would be used for is for evacuating stormwater out of the diversion following a flood. This cost option about a $38 million idea. And there are a whole litany of other hybrid options, and this is really where we'd like the mayor and the council to weigh in on what you think is reasonable. You're the stewards of these facilities that we're talking about, so your perspective is most valuable to us. So potential scenarios here, perhaps there's a scenario where we would acquire properties that have structures that are located below the 100-year floodplain. Maybe that's our threshold. That would be relatively consistent with what has been done at the Moose Lodge. That building is above the 100-year, but not above the 2011. So that decision was made to allow that structure to stay, to avoid those social impacts, and maybe that's a consistent action that could be considered moving forward. We could also flood-proof the library to an elevation, right? Maybe it's not to the flood of record. Maybe it's to an elevation where, if there's a threshold established for what you think an investment should be, if you want to put $5 million into it, we can likely tell you what elevation we could get to and flood-proof that structure and give you a feel for how resilient that structure could be to flooding with a certain specific investment. We could do something similar for the police department. And like I said, that 6th Street pump station, again, that's going to be an important one. The strategy that we're talking about doing there is basically making that structure flood-proof in the sense that we would remove a majority of the electrical gear and place that higher up on the hill, out of the floodplain. And then, basically during a flood threat, that building and the pumps and everything else go underwater. It's not a big deal. Their submersible pumps are designed to be underwater. So that part of it isn't a concern to us. And, there'd be some operations and maintenance activities that would have to occur following a flood threat, but the infrastructure itself would still be functional. So again, we're here to request your feedback, your perspectives, try to answer any questions that you have. Just a couple of things to maybe spur some thought here. Of particular value to me and to the joint board would be able to hear what your risk tolerance is for city-owned facilities like the library and the police station. Want to hear your perspective on privately owned properties and acquisition of them. Want to hear what the potential infrastructure investment would be in the current police station. Obviously, if the idea is to build something new, wouldn't make a lot of sense to dump a bunch of money in to protect it. It doesn't seem like that's the direction that you're going, but we'd like to know that. And then also just a question like what investment level, and Alderman Blessam kind of teed this off on the last agenda item. I mean, what investment level seems reasonable as you consider flood risk reduction for the library and the police station? And then also, what other information would you like from us so we can go to work to provide for you? So, Mr. Mayor, that's the information that I've got for you, and here to answer questions and take feedback.
I've got a couple questions just kind of to start it off. Maybe this goes back to flood protection 101, but is it your philosophy or the philosophy of the board that if we had to have flood protection to where if we have an event like in 2011 to where it would be, for the most part, for the lack of a better term, a hands-off flood protection, that we could handle all the water and not build a dike, not build a levee, a temporary levee like was what was around the library in 2011.
Mr. Mayor, ultimately that has been the mantra of the joint board is we are designing to protect infrastructure to the 2011 flood. Obviously, we know as the farther we get into this thing, we hit what could be described as practical limits, right, with regard to social impacts being too great, the cost being too high. In this particular case, I mentioned it earlier, there are no homes in this particular area. As a result of that, the joint board doesn't view this as a high priority. That's just the reality of it in terms of how the joint board views this, right? But understanding the city's perspective as the owner of a majority of that infrastructure down there is also really important before the joint board would move forward with a master plan that would either include or exclude capital investment in this area.
And just as a separate question on this, since 2011, obviously you've put a lot of time and effort and your expertise into this, not only on the planning side of it, but also down in Bismarck during the legislative sessions. Talk a little bit, just kind of some of the feedback, maybe if you're willing to talk about maybe your opinion or, what's the temperature like down in Bismarck? There are a number of water projects that are in the state. Talk about, your feeling and optimism on the potential for any additional state funding from what we secured basically last session.
So one of the signals, Mayor Ross, that we received within the last year was related to feedback that we got during the Water Topics Overview Committee that held its meetings in Minot. We talked to them about the difficulties that we were seeing in the bidding environment and how we're very concerned about what this means for the bottom line for the capital cost of the entire project, the cost to complete the project, and things like that. And the feedback that we got from the legislature was essentially, we've got your back, and if we need to talk about extending the amount that's been budgeted biennially to, instead of 5 biennia, maybe it's 6, of $76.1 million. There was an appetite to consider that conversation, I would say. But it's incumbent upon us on the joint board side to hone in on what that number is based on current market conditions and where we see things going, but also based on our attempts to shave cost on this thing to get it done. I mean, ultimately, that's our goal. And we view the biggest threat to that goal is lack of funding. So we need to start talking about ways to reduce potentially the scope of the flood protection project in areas where the only way I can describe it is where maybe the juice isn't worth the squeeze, you know? But that's a public conversation, you know, that we need to have. So that's a part of why I'm here today.
Rob?
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Ryan, thank you for the work you guys have been doing on this. A couple questions, and just making sure I understand. With your flood level maps, so it looks like there'd be a low to moderate risk of flooding in the library, just the bottom floor levels, and the same thing with the police department and the old fire station portion of it. Is that correct? The basement and maybe a little bit where the garage is there?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Fuller, so I've got the library diagram here up on the wall, or up on the screen here. In terms of what defines low and high risk, maybe you
Right.
tell me what that is, and I'll tell you yes or no.
We're not gonna, in the event of a 100-year flood, if they set the level at 1557, we're not gonna see significant flooding of either the existing police department structure down there or the library. There'll be a little bit of flooding in the bottom if we didn't do anything at all, right?
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But, and I guess I'm just playing this game in my head for my fellow council members. If we have another flood like we had in 2011, God forbid, and we see those types of levels, it may cost us a few $1 million if we don't do anything to fix those facilities. Or if we put another temporary dike in place, maybe it costs us $1 million to do that versus $38 to $64 million to protect it. Again, to your comment, is the juice worth the squeeze? And in this area, I think the city, if it was private residents, maybe we would have a different opinion, obviously. But as far as the city is concerned, I'm not willing, personally, as a member of the city council, to pay those types of money for something that may happen sometime over the next 100 years. It may not, but it wouldn't cost us ultimately that type of money to repair or replace or prevent if we didn't spend it. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
I think it depends on severity,
Right.
and we're talking about hypothetical events that, it's not a question if another 2011 type flood is going to occur. It's a question of when,
Okay.
right? And, statistically, that should be a long time from now, but it could happen next year, right? There's a chance, right?
Well, if it
So
happens next year, our flood control isn't done anyway, so we're in big trouble already,
it could
right?
happen in 11 years.
Okay. But so let's, playing the what if game, like you said, I know it's hypotheticals, but if we're looking at a 2011 type flood, our costs to prevent that could be 10 to 15 times what it would actually cost to just repair it or put a temporary dike in place, is what I was kind of getting at.
Yeah, I don't know that I would agree with that. And here's why, right? So if we have a 2011 type flood, hypothetically speaking, in 12 years when the project is done.
Yeah.
Okay, so bear with me here, okay? The elevation of that flood is going to be at 1565.
Okay.
That's going to be onto the main floor of the library
Okay.
at that point. That's
But
going
again,
that's
if
going to
we
be a
go
lot
throw,
of damage.
we go throw $1 million of dirt down with a temporary dike or levee,
Sure. Yep.
right?
Yep.
That- I mean,
There's absolutely ways to reduce that flood risk, and I think, the particular strategy that gets deployed at that particular time, it's going to be dependent on the flood
flood.
that we get. Let's not get necessarily have we all have perfect knowledge, right, of the 2011 flood. What I can tell you is that a similar flood will happen in the future. It's just a question of when. But I can guarantee you this: it will not happen the same way, right? So, if we had 45 days to prepare in 2011 because of the various, events that kind of led up to the big one. If we have a similar rain event on the Des Lacs River, we've got a day, right? So I just think it's important to, consider some of those different things. It's a risk-informed, risk-based discussion that we're having here.
Absolutely.
But your point is spot on. I mean, it's why we're here talking about it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So just staying on that topic, though, what, I guess, if we're not doing it, if we go the route of just saying, hey, we're going to protect it with dirt, if we need to, how does that affect, or how could that potentially affect the flood insurance maps?
Mr.
I mean, if
Mayor-
there's no protection in that area.
Mr. Mayor, there would definitely be flood insurance implications associated with like flood insurance for the library, or flood insurance for the current police station. Those flood insurance costs would be pretty significant should you choose to purchase that coverage on an annual basis. I don't know exactly what those would be, but my sense is that they would be considerably higher than what you're paying now.
Yeah, and I guess, I mean, I was thinking the same thing, but I'm also thinking the optics, if we got, we've got $1 billion flood control project and we leave a hole in it. I just the kind of the public perception of that, well, why didn't you finish it? Why are we dumping dirt to save the police department or the public library? So that's just kind of a thought and some of the concern that I have in that regards. But Mike, I know you had some questions.
Yeah, so just a quick series of them here, Ryan. So at what elevation does the maple diversion start to get used? When do we turn that thing on?
Elevation, I'm not going to have off the top of my head. The trigger is a flow rate of 3,000 CFS, which is a 1 in 10 year event, basically on the river.
So that's actually going to get used relatively often. I mean, that's the idea, right? And that's part of making sure it's functioning and doing all the things that goes along with that. And and when that occurs with what we've approved now on the north side, that means 6th Street is closed. It means 6th Street is also closed at the underpass.
Correct.
Is there a plate system there, or does it?
Currently, without any protection down there,
Shouldn't
no.
be anything, right? There's
The
nothing.
water
on
would
that
come into
side.
the
It would actually
intersection.
come up. Okay. All right. So that's that. And then if you mentioned the relocation option, which is in here, if we went with a relocation option, are the federal matches and things that go along with that, are any of those available for that? Are there federal dollars that would offset that? I'm not necessarily advocating for that, but I want to make sure we understand the playing field we're on here.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Blessum, I think what we're talking about is something similar to what the city did with City Hall, right? Secured money through the National Disaster Resilience Competition, relocated a function, not necessarily a whole building, but a function out of the floodplain.
Yep.
I guess I would assume that similar opportunities would be available to the city in the future. In terms of how we would look at a relocation, it would be just like how we look at relocations of every other structure, where essentially get an appraisal done and basically pay, minimum of appraised value, split 75-25 between state and local would be how we would approach it, absent seeing some sort of funding opportunity that would seem like a good fit.
But just to clarify then, so in that case, let's just say that we put the option on the table to relocate the library, because we're going to leave it unguarded, essentially, right? We'd end up tearing it down because we're not going to leave it there to deteriorate. So if we did that, the cost of that could be covered at the match rates. Is that the right way to think of that?
Yep.
Okay. All right. And then just to kind of follow on, if you had to throw a number to us on putting up the same type of ring levies that went down there last time, what is that? I mean, Rob threw out $1 million. Is it 200,000 to throw enough dirt to protect the library, to protect the police department?
I would say it's probably near the $1 million that, you know.
And so
Rob's
even-
swag in that regard is as accurate as mine, you know,
Yeah.
standing here or whatever.
Yeah.
We haven't done that.
But in any case, I think the thing that goes through my mind then, I think it maybe just following where Rob was headed here is that, you know, if we all assume that it's coming, right, at some point, we're going to have this happen again. We could do that theoretically 38 times then, right? By putting the dirt down. And again, we're not talking here about protecting homes. You know, we did some amazing things in Northeast Minot, right? The tactical work that was done to protect that area is phenomenal, really, if you think about it. And so we will have that ability. It's great that the joint board is designed to not need to, although we do have to put a bunch of plates in. We got to do a bunch of stuff, right? Well, there's work, but it's great that we're doing that. But in my opinion, when we look at a couple of city structures, to me, that feels like if we've got the opportunity, that might be the place to save a little here. And to take on that risk and to know that, you know what, when that comes and we work with the team, whether it's Jason's or whoever's it is, to make sure we have a general idea of what we would do when it's coming and we go make it happen that way. I mean, that's where my mind's going. And then the last one, and maybe for Harold or maybe for Dave, do we hold flood insurance on those structures today? Do we carry that? We do. Okay. So as those maps change, if we went that direction, we would have a decision to make on whether that still makes sense, right? Because if it goes nuts and it's 10 times what the premium has been, we'd have to consider that, right? I mean, we'd have to look at what makes sense there if we take a different direction that leaves this unprotected. Okay. Thank you.
You're there. Scott.
Thank you for all the information, Ryan. The question, I guess, that I have, if we would do nothing right now and assume the risk, does that affect any other part of the MI4?
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Samuelson, no, it would not.
So we could actually look at this years down the road too, if we decided we wanted to do something to protect that.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
One last one. Ryan, just one additional thing based on, and actually it's good that you got this one up here. If we came in here and took that same general idea of the existing flood wall that's there, that one that was built to protect that one door, and we brought that up to 1565, I realize we probably hit other spots around the building where that gets a little hairy. I mean, is there an option in there that helps us? I guess the other part then though is that wouldn't necessarily, if we bring it to 1557, does that take that out of the plane if we just move that wall up to cover that? Or do we have that other garage door maybe?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, there would be more work than just adding 2 feet to that wall, because at that point, you would need to get that system certified and accredited by FEMA. Now, flood risk reduction by putting up a wall that we think is gonna work and getting that wall accredited by FEMA, those are 2 separate things, unfortunately. There's a different, set of requirements there. But to your question, one of the ideas that we've been kind of working in the background here is looking at an elevation of around 1563 around the library. And the reason why that one's particularly important is because a vast majority of the library is at or above that elevation around the building already. And the part that's really tough and tricky is the north side, where there's basically no room between the mechanical equipment and the railroad tracks that are there. That elevation, that ground elevation is at 1563 right now. So there wouldn't necessarily be structural improvements that would need to be made there, but there would need to be structural improvements around the western portion, or that portion of the library that was built in roughly 2000, where the children's library is at. I mean, that's the piece that's highly susceptible is not the right word, but susceptible to flooding, right? The lowest piece. Structurally, you can't see it on here necessarily, but the western walls of the library, they're precast panels, okay? Those are not gonna perform well under a hydrostatic load. If there's water up against there, I mean, there will be problems during a flood. So I mean, just some of those considerations I think are important. But the take-home message of the point that I was trying to make but haven't made yet is that I think we could go to a lower elevation much more modestly in terms of cost to reduce risk at the library.
Right, right. And that's kind of what I was getting at, was that there was maybe some options around that west end that we can look at that don't have to be the full protection model we're looking for. Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion? Any other questions? Any other direction? Is there anything from you, Paul?
Nope, still just taking it all in.
Okay.
So, Mr. Mayor, I guess, just to make sure that Ryan has what he's walking out for, and Ryan, if I'm not catching all of it, make sure that I know. I guess I would bring a motion that says we do not move forward with really any of the full protection models. And that we give direction to the joint board, at least the council's take is that those buildings not be protected by permanent structures. And, certainly we'd be open to some minor adjustments that make probably the library in particular better off. Actually, if I could, real quick, Mr. Mayor, I do have one other question that I didn't write down. I forgot about it. The pump station, would you advise us to get something permanent there? I mean, I'm even thinking a wall right around it. Like, is that needed? Or like you said, do we just relocate the pieces that shouldn't go underwater and handle it that way?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, excellent question. The cheapest way to do this is going to be to flood, what we call flood-proof the pump station by basically relocating electrical gear up the hill.
Okay.
Building a flood wall around it, highly expensive.
Right,
And
right.
we wouldn't recommend it.
Okay, so to get my motion, what I'm looking for is that we give direction to the joint board that as a council, we are saying do not move forward with any of the major protection models that have been brought before us, and that we handle this either on a tactical basis when something's occurring or with minor adjustments that they would suggest to us over time. Is that okay? Michaela, sorry.
I'm trying to do it in 100 characters, so.
Yeah.
Second.
Okay.
So, and Ryan, is that clear to you what I'm saying there? That
I will be sure to check the minutes.
Yeah.
But yes, I think I understand the intent.
So we have a motion, we have a second. My question to you, Alderman Blessum, is, so what you're saying is no, or is it just at this time, no permanent flood protection be around the area of the library?
It is, yes, and I think for me, what I'm really sensitive to right now is, I feel like throughout the project, both to the residents of the city as well as to the legislature, to all of our other partners, to be able to show them, boy, are we doing our due diligence to try to find places to make this project really work and make sure that the numbers are working. We've got big numbers that are jumping in other spots, but we're also working to find places where we can draw that back without impacting residents directly in their homes and hopefully not affecting the flood map for them. Now, we do have to deal with it on our side. That's not a good thing. But I don't see value in putting a $38 million structure in place to try to avoid that for a couple of city-owned buildings. That's my take on it.
Yeah, I guess I would look at it, a couple of things, just from my history and being with Ryan and visiting the legislature and legislators about this. I do have some concern about whether it's the optics or sending a message that we're going to leave a hole in the dike. I can see legislators going, we're giving you this investment. We're helping you out on a 35% share. But if you're not going to finish the project, so that's a concern I have of sending that type of message of that when we have guys like Ryan and his team that are really, they came back to us with, on the east side of town where they come back and say they found a solution that's going to save us $40 million. I think that's their mindset, and I think that's what they're looking for. I just fear the question, and we know, and I know it'll be coming if we move forward with it. So it's just a concern with me. So,
Mr. Mayor, maybe before you finalize your decision, would there be any value, and maybe Mr. Lyman can help with this, of hearing the perspective and the concerns of the library board who operate the library before the council ultimately finalizes this decision? I think that voice and that perspective hasn't been heard yet.
Come on up, Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of the Minot City Council. I come wearing the hat as a library board member. Been going to the library, it seems like every week for over 20 years. Love the library. It's a tough conversation you guys are having because it's a big balance between cost. Our library board clearly hasn't seen this since you guys have seen this for the first time. I'm guessing Zana would like to make a few comments, or maybe would stand for some questions as well. I would also just remind us as we have this conversation about costs, that we also have a conversation about the fact that 80 to 100 members of the police department work there across the street. 20 to 25 members of the library work there. I don't know how I would feel going to a place that didn't have the same level of flood protection, but I'm going to guess that some of them will have some concerns about that. As well, we serve how many tens of thousands of people through the public library. It's a valuable resource. I can understand that we're weighing the balance between costs and what you can afford and what you can't afford. Those are valuable conversations. I would just throw out the reminder of what that means to the community to protect certain assets in certain ways. Maybe there's a $5 million option that gets you a certain level of protection that isn't 40 or 60 or 80 million, and that's worth consideration. Similar to what you looked at for the police department, where is there a scaled down version that still gets you some of what or most of what you're looking for and good bang for your buck. So I just throw those comments out there. And again, our library board hasn't had a chance to look at this. I don't know if there is an opportunity to, or if you would entertain that opportunity for the library board to look at this and at least weigh in their public meeting, or kind of what your opinion is on that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mark? Thank you, Mark. Rob, you had something.
I was just going to kind of respond to what you had said, Mr. Mayor. Like, I guess, and I see your point of view on what the legislator and the state people would think, but I mean, we're not talking about leaving it completely unprotected. Again, we're going to formulate a plan, kind of like we did in 2011, that if we don't have permanent structure in place, we're going to throw something down temporary that we would protect the library and the police department and everything else. I think our legislators at this point, with the inflationary nature that's going on across the country right now, would be glad that we're not going to try and take more out of this, and be happy that we can fix it with maybe $1 million to a $2 million local alternative, rather than asking them for their share of $40 to $68 million. So that was all I was going to get at.
Mike?
Just to add to that as well, certainly, Ryan, a part of this is, as MI4 progresses and we're doing more and you guys are getting further and further into that, if that epiphany shows up that says, hey, there's a great option for $6 million, we can do this, we'd love to hear it. I think I can speak for all of us that we would. And so I don't ever want to, just like you guys did with the Kemper property, right? Like that value add is really important in this entire process. So I think it's important for me to make sure you have our general sentiment, and that's what we're talking about right now. But that door is always open if something comes, if an idea jumps in.
Mr. Mayor and Alderman Blessum, if I may, I would say, I didn't come here expecting any type of a motion to be made. I'm here really soliciting feedback. At this point, the message from the joint board side is that this particular area is currently a relatively low priority because there aren't any homes back there. The intent is to not design anything permanently for probably quite a while. But before we, move forward with updating a master plan, which a master plan, as you guys know, it will change between now and when it's actually built. But before we update that, I think it's just important to get your perspective. We didn't want to blindside anybody.
So it's kind of my concern, Mike, about we pass this motion that kind of directs them not even to look at that anymore. So they take their focus off that, which they've already said it's a low priority. So I think I would be more comfortable with saying continue with your low priority, turn your focus to other priorities, and then if that epiphany comes, then come back. I don't want them to take their eye off the ball completely. I want them to, that may come tomorrow, but if we're directing them to say, don't even look at it, which is kind of what the motion is, then they take their eye completely off the ball. I just don't want I don't want to see that happen. But I'd be comfortable with following the direction of the board by saying it's going to be a low priority. We'll adjust, on the fly if we need to.
Yeah.
So.
And just to respond to that, that's actually where I was headed as well. So Ryan, just a question for you. Do you believe, whether it's the legislature or whatever partners we've got, is it a better position for us to continue with where the joint board is, which is low priority, knowing that, again, we're having this discussion. You have a decent idea of what we're talking about here. But are we on a better footing to say, yeah, we're going to still address it, and we're not sure what that's going to look like yet? Is that a better footing for us? Or maybe it doesn't matter. Yeah, I don't know.
If Kate, acknowledging a bias that I'm here representing the joint board, right? The joint board perspective is that this is a low priority. If the city says, yeah, for us too, then that's great for the joint board, because the joint board now has, we're in an echo chamber, right? We're saying the same things. In terms of, messaging and things like that, I would rather us be connected than disconnected when we're talking to third parties like legislators. In terms of, does it matter politically? My answer is I don't know.
So Mr. Mayor, I think, I'm comfortable. I think we've made clear the thought process here. I guess I would be comfortable just withdrawing it and leaving us at a low priority. I think we're saying the same thing. I just wanted to make sure that you got very direct feedback. And if you got that with that, then I'm fine with that.
It's the second.
Did I second it this time?
I think you did.
Yeah,
Actually, I have Scott.
I'm fine with that.
Second.
It was me.
It was Rob. Okay, never mind.
You're okay with that? There's no objection?
Yeah.
No objection from you, Paul?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. So without objection, we'll withdraw that and just provide the discussion as direction. So is there anything further on this item?
So, Mr. Mayor, I don't know if we want it on this item or where we want to have that. I believe actually one of the main points of this meeting today, even though it's not laid out that way, was to start a discussion around a half-cent sales tax. We can have a little bit of that discussion. We don't have our full council here, but I think more than anything, Harold, you guys would need direction for a future meeting anyway, right? That's the key there. So is that something that you want us to direct you on now, or would you like to see some of that discussion, or what would you like?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, yeah, some initial conversation and direction on that of where the council's at temperature-wise with that, is the suggestion of a public safety sales tax dead on arrival with the council and not willing to be considered at all? Or is it something you want to explore further, or is it a definitive, yes, we think we need to do that and start preparing the paperwork to put it on the ballot? The concern is how it segues in with the conversation that we had on Tuesday. You only have so much sales tax capacity, right? And ultimately, it's up to the council to prioritize on behalf of the community which of these is more important, right? If public safety sales tax is an avenue for potentially funding the improvements that we need to make for the police department and for our fire department, where does that rank in priority with regards to the parks request? And what's the probabilities and risks of asking for both of those at the same time? Those kinds of things. Ultimately, that's council's decision on how to prioritize that and how to lead that out. And I just wanted to make sure the council had the opportunity to discuss that in a comprehensive way versus trying to piecemeal this over or jeopardize one over the other because we didn't talk about them at the same time.
Yeah. And I think that makes sense. And so, so number one, Steph, could you clarify again? There was a discussion Tuesday. If we have a motion and we're going to put this onto a ballot, did I remember that correctly? That we need a super majority for that vote? Is that correct?
Supermajority vote for to call a special election, so
Okay,
5 of
to
7
call
members.
that in the first place. So,
Yes.
so that would include even the park board version. So that special election in the first place requires that vote.
Yes, so
Okay.
in that upcoming meeting, the resolution is gonna require the supermajority to even move forward with the special election.
Okay. So, Mr. Mayor, if I may, I'm happy to talk a little bit about my thoughts at least. I always am. You guys know that. But at the same time, I also want to make sure we don't have Mark or Lisa here. And so that's a little bit problematic for me, especially since Lisa was very clear. You know, I think she cares very much about that. So if you'd like to hear from us, I'm sure we'd all be happy to talk about it a little bit. But I also want to make sure that we're thinking about that.
And just to follow up, whether Harold or Steph, I mean, what kind of a timetable this resolution with the park board is going to be on Monday's agenda?
Correct. That was the motion of the council, was to have that for Monday's agenda. And it's not so much that I need direction from the council today, if yes, we're moving forward with a public safety sales tax or not. The questions today should be directed, what would that look like? How would that work? And then Monday night, when that's on the agenda, and I want you to have that in mind as you're making a decision on the public safety sales tax on behalf of the parks, right? And again, this could be from the council feels the community is not supportive of a increase in sales tax at all, and we're not approving any sales tax increase to go on the ballot. Or it could be all the way up to we'll put them both on the ballot and let the public decide. Or it could be the council could take its home rule authority and go ahead and approve the sales tax and put it to the public having to defeat that off of a referendum. Those are the three alternatives in my mind that the council has, and I'm not necessarily giving a recommendation at this point which one of those you should do. I'm just trying to provide the council the information that you can discuss that and weigh through that and make the determination and give ultimately staff guidance on what do you want to do. Are you putting the parks sales tax on the ballot or not? And are we going to move forward with consideration of a potential of a public safety sales tax or not?
So there's nothing that says, I mean, if, let's say we're going to move forward and put it on the ballot, do we have to have that ready? And I know the timeline is tight, but there's nothing that says or requires that we have to have something ready to go Monday night.
No, ultimately, you're calling a special election. You can schedule that special election at any time that you deem necessary. I would suggest that the Parks Department would like that sooner. I mean, they would like that next spring, but there's nothing that obligates the city council to do that. That's up to you. You're paying for the special election. You're scheduling that. That would be up to you as far as what the timing of that would be. In my opinion, the spring, when you would normally have a spring election, would make sense because that's what the public's used to, but you're not required to hold to that. Typically, if we were doing a general election for election of council, typically you would have until the end of January to make that decision and to have the ballots prepared and all the preparations for that election to be in place before that happened. But I do believe that the Parks Department would like this decision sooner rather than later.
Steph, did you have something to add?
So just a status update, so I've sent the resolution over to the parks attorney for review, but the date that's contemplated as of current, and this is subject to change, and I think it was maybe even in the memo at the special meeting, was April 29th, 2025. So there's some time there for the council to kind of weigh this option over, kind of look, I mean, Fargo just passed a public safety sales tax. You can kind of look at how they address that too and do some research on it as well. So that's the election day that they're kind of looking at is April 29th, 2025, subject to change.
Mike?
So, Mr. Mayor, if we do want to have a little bit of discussion today, and I'm not sure if it works great for Paul if he's in a spot to talk, but this has been an initiative he's championed. When he was president of the council, I believe this was in his letter last year for the budget. And if he's able, I would love to hear from him his thoughts and why this is something that he has been interested in. If that's better done when he's able to talk easier, that's fine too.
Paul, are you comfortable to talk now, or would you like to wait for Monday?
No, I can speak to it now, surface level, and I think have a deeper conversation come Monday. this is something that, and this is obviously, when this was in my president's letter and part of our budget process last year, this was not contemplating a parks half-cent sales tax as well. But this was, again, taking the burden off of property taxes and for citizens and diversifying revenue streams to help pay for some of the ongoing costs of public safety, as well as some of the unknown challenges that we knew were on the horizon, whether that was, new police station, whether that be a remodel or building new or some sort of hybrid version that Lisa might have in place or in mind, or whether that was concerns with expanding, fire protection across the growing community. I know that those conversations have been had. So surface level, or I guess kind of a high level view of where my mind was trying to not keep going back to the well on property taxes, trying to diversify. But now we're asked as a council member, as council members, to prioritize now. Do we challenge? Because we are challenging in parks and maybe taking away from some of their support for a half-cent sales tax, because like we've all said and we all know, because we're citizens as well, there's only so much money to go around. There's only so much taxing ability that citizens can take. Is 1 cent too much? I don't know. But that's a decision, and that's a question that citizens are going to have to make at the ballot box. And do we, as citizens, I'm going to put my citizen hat on now, would I rather support a public safety sales tax, or would I rather support a park and recreation sales tax? And that's a question that citizens are going to have to ask. And I think that's a conversation that each one of us are going to have to ask ourselves when contemplating moving these issues forward.
Thank you, Paul. Any further discussion? Rob?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To Mike's point a little bit earlier, or Alderman Blessum's point a little bit earlier about our personal budgets and everything else, all of us in this community have been feeling the effects of what's been going on for the last 4 years with inflation and everything else, privately, personally, businesses. And here we are, we have projects and things we want to do as a city, and we don't have the money to do it. So what's our answer? Instead of saying, hey, we're going to wait like all of us would do in our normal life, or maybe having to borrow money as certain instances, we're like, let's go raise taxes on everybody again to do this stuff. I ran saying I would not raise taxes. My goal to come on to this city council was to help alleviate some of the financial spending I thought that was going on within the city and help drive down property tax and tax as a whole. I understand we need to do something with the Minot PD. I totally get that. But I would rather see us use the NAS money in 2 to 4 years when that falls off to maybe do those renovations rather than raising tax on everybody else in town again. To Paul's point, you put 1 half-cent sales tax out there for the Park District, it maybe stands a chance. I don't know that people in town are really feeling much about raising taxes, but you put 2 of them out there, one for public safety and one for the park board, and quite honestly, I think they both fail, that in my opinion. But let's play this game for a second. Let's say we put them both out there and they get approved, okay? So now, not only is Minot, North Dakota, one of the highest property tax large cities in North Dakota, we will also have one of the highest sales taxes in the state of North Dakota at 8.5% if both of those approved, right? What does that do for economic development or growth of Minot? Do you think people are going to move to Minot knowing we have high property tax and some of the highest sales tax in the city? I don't see that happening. I don't see businesses coming here. I don't see development and economic growth happening if we do these things. So we have to look at other measures and other things to do, whether it be grants or some federal stuff or whatever. And not that I'm a fan of the federal money, but rather than raising taxes on all of us here, which I think is ultimately going to hurt everything as far as growth and development, we need to come up with some different plans. So while I'm fine with giving the Park District their ability to put it on the ballot and see if the citizens want it, I won't even entertain putting a half-cent sales tax on the ballot for public safety or those types of things, personally.
Rob, oh, Paul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to raise a point, I guess, as well to our motion made earlier by Mike, by Alderman Blessam, that, you know, we want to look at some options from our advisement team on what level of investment does, you know, 5 million, 10, $15 million look like. And I think that might change revenue streams as well. And Dave can speak to that at a future meeting or now, you know, if we were to say we need $15 million for renovations for the police department, and we feel that that's sufficient, maybe we don't have to look at a sales tax. Maybe there's other revenue streams or other costs internally that we can look at. So again, I think a part of that decision for me, for public safety, is knowing what level of investment we're looking to make and what level we're comfortable with. So I think that has to be a conversation, and that's information I think we all need in order to make an educated decision.
Harold, then I'll jump.
If I may, Mr. Mayor, just real quickly, maybe just to respond with Mr. Fuller. Not necessarily an argument. I think you make valid points, and I think that's the point of what we're here talking about. But I just wanted to address real quickly the comment regarding Minot having the highest property taxes. And I get that there was probably a point in time where Minot had one of the biggest increases in property tax than probably anywhere else in the state. But I think that, and I want to give the current council some credit here with the work that you did with this last budget, in that when I presented my city manager recommended budget, we did some comparisons of the city of Minot compared to other communities, and we're at the mid-level of the bigger cities. And I think with the work that the council did this last budget, you guys did a great job of lowering the mill levy, lowering the property tax burden. While my understanding is that many communities or larger communities across the state were raising theirs when we lowered ours. So I hope the public gives the council some credit that you've begun to fix that, and that we are no longer the highest property tax burdensome community within the state, that you've already begun and made a significant step towards changing that. And I hope that the community begins giving credit to that. And I hope the state legislature gives us credit that Minot is no longer the highest property tax burden city in the state. And in fact, I think if we go and compare, and I still need to prepare the data to do that in preparation for the legislature, I think with the actions that the council did this last budget session, Minot will be the lowest property tax burden of the bigger cities in the state of North Dakota. So I think you guys deserve the credit for the work that you did on that, and I hope we can begin to change the perception of that. And that's not to say that we can't continue doing work to continue to alleviate more of that burden, but I'm hoping that you guys get the credit for the work that you did.
Mike?
And I appreciate that, Harold. That was important to us. The three of us that joined the council, it was a priority. I guess I'm going to echo a little bit of what Rob has said and just add a couple things to it. So, I'm of the mind that the park board is elected by the people. We have a role to play, and that's why I was asking for clarification on Tuesday on what that role actually is. Whether I'll vote yes or no on their initiative is a different question than whether I think it deserves to be on the ballot. And they face the voters just like we do. They're putting this out there. I think it should be on the ballot. So that's kind of that first part. As far as the public safety half cent from our side, even taking the park side off the table, if we looked at this in 2 years, let's say it fails, and in 2 years we're looking at it again, I'll be in the same place, because one of the things I want to be really careful about, I generally like the idea that we have property tax, essentially a buy down from the sales tax side today. We've got that in our pennies right now. We're getting some relief that's coming through those sales tax pennies. And in general terms, that trade-off to me is a good one up to a certain point. I remember Alderman Pittner talking during our retreat, and it stuck with me, and it's an important thought for us always to have, that a sales tax disproportionately can hurt the lowest incomes in our community. And so, as I mentioned last Friday in our economic development meeting, someone making $25,000 a year with a couple kids at home, when they go to buy clothing for their kids to go to school, we're pulling a strong sales tax on that. And so we always want to keep that in mind, that there is an upper limit. We want to be careful about sales tax and where that goes. With all that being said, sales tax is, I think, a good way for us to generate income. If I thought 1-to-1, that now if we did it and forever, we would have that savings from the property tax side, I might be more interested in talking. Where I get a little bit nervous is we don't have caps, we don't have anything that stops that. And so the backfill that is natural, whether I'm still on council or 10 years from now, there's nothing making those two things offset each other. So we may be glad that, hey, we're bringing in an extra 6.5 million from the sales tax, but there's no guarantee that that relief actually happens on the property tax side. And so I'm a little bit worried about that one-to-one aspect. You know, we may decide to do that, but the next council may not. And so I get nervous about burdening the people with that. I think right now we're at a particularly tough time in history. And so I just want to make sure that we're being cognizant of all those pieces and trying to do the things that we can for the community to leave more money in their pockets. You know, something that stuck with me that you've said, Harold, when we're talking about whether it's economic development or other things, is making sure that people have more disposable income in their pocket that they can use. And this is one of the ways that we do that, is making sure that we leave more of those dollars there, because whether it's a downtown business or my business or anybody's business, those disposable dollars are what matters. And this hits that directly without question. So again, to me, it's not a matter of saying, no, I would never, ever support that. That's not the point. I think the point that we're sitting at, we have a couple decisions that are coming. Hopefully that kind of gives my perspective on those decisions.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Rob?
Thank you. And just to respond real quick to Harold, I appreciate what you said, and I get it. And if I had said Minot was the highest, what I meant to say was one of the highest, so I correct me if I was wrong. But what I would ask you is, even though we have brought the property tax down, what's the number one complaint of every citizen in Minot, North Dakota? The high property taxes. So we've brought them down, but we haven't brought them down enough where they're going to see and feel that. And so adding more tax to that, all I was getting at is I think they would not be appreciative of that, especially on the platform that I ran on to keep property tax and tax down as a whole. So,
Mr. Mayor, if I could just add to that.
I'm going to give Paul, his hand's been up for a while. Paul? His electronic
my
hand has
hand was
been
up since last time, so I guess I can
have
probably
to-
Oh,
put it
okay.
down.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Mike.
And actually, so I just wanted to maybe make sure the public understands a couple things maybe that Harold's getting at. When we look at city-wise, I agree with you completely. Yeah, we made a big step. Minot residents are burdened by our other local subs. Right now, we're getting crushed by our school board, and again, the people voted for it, but we've got a shiny new school on the hill that's costing all of us a lot of money right now. And it's going to for 23 more years. So we can all do our part and take the right steps here, but we've got other taxing entities that are helping drive that number. So when I talk about the numbers and whether it's percentage of the value of your home or whatever that is, Minot remains near the top across the board. But from a city perspective, we did our part. And that started with you, Harold. We continue that with the caveat that the steps we took this year are not permanent steps either. We didn't really change the trajectory of spending at this point, other than we did some things with wages that were good. But with that, we've still got much more work to do in the future. And so, I appreciate the good words, and I think we have done some of the right things, but residents of Minot have still got a long road to hoe with property tax, because the other taxing entities just honestly don't have a lot of room, and they're burdened by what has happened over the last few years.
Anything further? Scott?
So, in coming up to decide to run for council, one of the things that I always thought was a good idea was a 0.5-cent city sales tax for public safety. But my version of it is looking at the sales tax that we already have. I believe there's places that could be adjusted, and we could put public safety on the sales tax and take away a few other things. We had a great opportunity to actually do some of that, but it got voted down. And people in Minot, and in North Dakota, I guess too, but in Minot, we're tapped out. We have no more to give. And I think that the school board needs to understand that, city council needs to understand that, and Ward County needs to understand that. We have no more to give.
Anything further? Seeing nothing further, we can move on to action item 4 on the agenda, and that's adjournment. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, we are adjourned.